Settle in, if you would. Let the day fall away, like the last light fading from a winter sky. Perhaps you are in a comfortable chair, a blanket across your knees, the house quiet around you. Or maybe you are lying in bed, the darkness a gentle weight, and only the distant hum of the night world keeps you company. However you find yourself, I want you to let your mind drift back, far back, nearly 2,000 years, to a place where the Roman Empire met its edge. Not a sharp, clean line on a map, but a living, breathing, often muddy boundary where the power of Rome faded into forests, mist, and the unknown. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a frontier at dusk. The kind of quiet that is not really silence, but a slow, deep sigh after a long day of noise, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the shouts of soldiers drilling, the bleating of goats, the chatter of children. And now, as the sun dips behind the palisades of a small fort, a different sound takes over. The crackle of cooking fires, the low murmur of voices speaking a mix of Latin and local dialects, the distant, lonely call of a horn from a watchtower, marking the changing of the guard. This is the sound of survival. This is the sound of Roman frontier families living at the edge of the known world. Let us imagine we are standing on a low rise, looking out over a settlement that clings to a riverbank. It is not a grand city like Rome, with its marble temples and bustling forums. It is a collection of wooden buildings, sturdy but unadorned, huddled near the turf and timber walls of a Roman fort. The fort itself is not a thing of beauty. It is practical, designed for defense, its gates heavy and iron-bound, its ditches deep. But the settlement outside its walls, the vicus, this is where life happens. This is where the families live. Who are these families? Many are the wives and children of legionaries. Officially, Roman soldiers were not allowed to marry while in service. But the law was for the city, for the tidy, orderly heart of the empire. Out here, on the edge, the rules bent. A soldier might form a union with a local woman, a family taking root in the shadow of the fort. Their children would grow up speaking 2 languages, learning Roman customs alongside the ways of the tribes. They would be bridge children, living between 2 worlds. Imagine a woman named, well, let us call her Livia. She is not her real name, but it feels right, a common name from the era. Livia is perhaps 30 years old, which on the frontier makes her both wise and weathered. She lives in a long house with a thatched roof, the walls made of wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and clay that keeps out the wind. The floor is packed earth, covered in places with rushes that smell dry and sweet. In one corner, a fire glows in a stone hearth, the smoke curling up through a hole in the roof. The smoke stings the eyes a little, but it also keeps the insects away, and it fills the room with the scent of wood smoke and cooking. Livia is preparing the evening meal. She has a pot of barley stew, slow simmered with a few scraps of pork and some wild greens she gathered that morning. There is also bread, flat and dense, baked on a stone. The family eats from simple clay bowls, the same ones her husband used when he was a boy, passed down and chipped, but still whole. The stew is not luxurious. It is the food of the frontier, plain, filling, made with what is available. But it is warm, and it is shared, and there is a sacred quality to that. Her husband, Marcus, is a legionary from a place far to the south, perhaps from Italia or Gaul. He joined the army when he was 18, a young man seeking adventure or escape from a small farm that could not support him. Now, after 15 years of service, he is stationed here on the river, where the empire bumps against the wild. He has seen things he never imagined. Snow that fell so deep it buried the roads, local tribes who painted their faces and moved like shadows through the forests, and a loneliness that settled in the bones. But he also has this, a home, a woman who knows his moods, children who call him Pater. Their children, a boy of 8 named Gaius and a girl of 6 named Aelia, are not yet asleep. They sit near the fire, playing a game with knucklebones. Gaius is trying to teach his sister how to throw them so they land a certain way, but she keeps laughing and scattering them across the floor. Aelia has her mother's dark hair and her father's serious eyes, but when she laughs, the whole house seems warmer. Survival for families like Livia and Marcus is a daily, hourly negotiation. It is about food, yes, but also about everything else. About staying healthy when the nearest doctor is a legionary medic who might be more accustomed to treating sword wounds than a feverish child. About keeping warm when the wind howls off the river and the roof leaks. About safety when the peace with the local tribes is fragile and rumors of raiders can spread faster than fire. And they survive by being resourceful, by adapting, by learning from the people who have lived on this land for generations. Livia, for instance, learned from the local women how to find the root that soothes a cough, which mushrooms are safe to eat after the rains, how to weave baskets from reeds that are stronger than the Roman ones. She trades with the merchants who come up the river, bartering her honey. She keeps a few hives behind the house for salt, for iron nails, for a roll of good cloth. The frontier economy is not about coins, though there are some. It is about trust, about a nod of recognition, about knowing who has extra grain this winter and who might need a warm cloak. And then there is the fort itself. The soldiers provide a kind of security, but they also bring a certain chaos. New recruits arrive, raw and scared. Veterans leave, their years of service finally ended, their faces lined by sun and wind. Every few months, a unit is transferred, and the whole settlement holds its breath. Will the new commander be fair? Will he trade with the civilians, or will he look down on them? It is a delicate balance, a dance between the military and the civilian world. I want you to imagine walking through this vicus, just as the night is settling in. The main street is a muddy track, rutted by cartwheels. On either side, the houses stand close together, their windows shuttered. A tavern, loud with the voices of off-duty soldiers, spills warm light and the smell of cheap wine. A blacksmith's forge is still glowing, the smith working late, his hammer making a steady, reassuring rhythm. A few women are gathered at the well, drawing water, their voices low as they share news. One might be complaining about the price of oil. Another might be worrying about her son, who has just joined the army and is stationed at a far-off fort. There is a constant undercurrent of anxiety in this life, but it is not the frantic, loud anxiety of the modern world. It is a slow, patient, simmering worry, like the kind that comes with knowing the harvest might fail, that a wolf could take a sheep, that a fever could sweep through the children. And yet, there is also a profound sense of community. When a child is born, the whole VICU celebrates. When a family loses their home to fire, everyone chips in to rebuild. They share tools, they share labor, they share the burden. Now, let us think about the edge itself. The edge of the empire is not a wall, though sometimes it is. In Britain, Hadrian's Wall was being built or maintained, a great stone barrier across the north. But the true edge was the line between Roman law and the law of the spear, between Roman order and tribal custom. Families on the frontier lived with one foot in each world. They might trade with a local chieftain one day, and then report his movements to the garrison the next. They might attend a Roman festival, offering incense to the emperor, and then later leave a small offering at a local shrine to a god whose name they did not know, but whose power they respected. This dual life was not always comfortable. Some families, particularly those who had been here for generations, became almost a third culture. They were not quite Roman, not quite native. They had their own ways of building houses, their own recipes, their own songs. They were frontier people, and they were proud of it. And they survived. They survived because they were stubborn, because they learned, because they adapted, and because, in the quiet hours of the night, when the fire burned low and the children slept, they held onto the small things, the taste of bread, the weight of a hand on a shoulder, the sound of rain on the thatch. Those small things, the daily rituals of family life, were the real walls that held back the dark. Let us drift a little deeper now. Imagine the sounds of this frontier night. The wind has picked up, rattling the wooden shutters. A dog barks somewhere, then falls silent. From the fort, you can hear the sentry's footsteps, a regular pace on the rampart. Inside the house, the fire pops and crackles. Livia is mending a tear in her husband's tunic, using a bone needle and sinew thread. Marcus sits whittling a piece of wood, perhaps shaping a new handle for a tool. The children have fallen asleep on a pile of straw near the hearth, wrapped in a single heavy blanket. Alia's hand is outstretched, her fingers curled as if she is still playing the game. And then a shift in the air, a sudden stillness. Marcus sets down his whittling and cocks his head. Livia stops her sewing. They both listen. For a moment, there is nothing. Then a distant cry, not human, but animal. A wolf, perhaps, or something else. The tension holds for a few heartbeats, and then it passes. Marcus nods, and Livia goes back to her needle. This is the frontier, the constant, quiet awareness that the border between safety and danger is thin, like the skin of a drum. But that does not stop them. They will go to sleep soon, after one last check of the door latch. They will wake in the morning before dawn to feed the fire, milk the goat, start the day's work. They will live. And in living, They will do what all families do. They will love, they will quarrel, they will hope, they will remember, and they will pass their stories down, whispers of a life on the edge, so that someone, somewhere, might one day find themselves drifting through a quiet night, thinking of them, just as we are now. And so the night deepens, and the fire burns lower, and the small sounds of the frontier settle into a kind of rhythm. The wind, that constant companion on these northern borders, has a voice of its own. Sometimes it whistles through the gaps in the wattle and daub. Sometimes it moans around the corner of the house. And sometimes, when the air is still and damp, it carries the scent of pine and distant smoke. Livia and Marcus have learned to read the wind. A shift from the east means cold, dry air from the steppes. A wind from the west brings rain, soft and persistent, that seeps into everything. Tonight, it is a north wind, sharp and carrying a hint of frost. Winter is not far off. Already, the leaves have turned and the geese have flown south. The locals, the tribes who have lived here for centuries beyond counting, have their own ways of predicting the first snow. They watch the behavior of the badgers, the thickness of the squirrels' coats, the angle of the sun at dusk. Livia has learned some of these signs, but she still relies on the old Roman calendar, marked on a slab of slate near the hearth. Tomorrow, she knows, she must prepare the house for the cold months. The straw in the walls needs to be checked, the roof thatch repaired where the wind has pulled it loose. There is a store of dried apples and salted pork in the cellar, but it will not last the whole winter. She will need to trade for more grain, perhaps with the quartermaster at the fort, who has a soft spot for her honey. She will also need to gather more firewood, though that is a task she shares with Marcus. The forest, just beyond the cleared fields, is a place of both plenty and danger. The trees are tall and dark, with undergrowth that can hide a wolf or a boar. The children are forbidden to go there alone, but the wood is good, dense, and slow burning, and the scent of it in the hearth is a comfort. Marcus, for his part, is thinking about the coming winter in a different way. He is a soldier, and winter means the campaigns stop. The tribes will retreat into their own settlements, and the fort will settle into a long, quiet vigil. It is a time for repairs, for training, for the slow boredom that can make men restless. But it is also a time when a man can be with his family. He can teach his son to carve or to recognize the stars. He can tell stories of the South, of the sun that burned hot and the sea that was blue, not gray. He can hold his daughter on his lap and braid her hair as his mother once braided his sister's. These are the small gifts of winter, and so the seasons turn. The frontier is not a place of dramatic change, but of slow, cyclical recurrence. Spring brings the thaw, the mud that is impossible to avoid, the first green shoots. It is a time of hope, but also of hunger, for the stores are low, and the new crops are not yet ready. The rivers swell, and sometimes the fort is cut off for days. Summer is brief, a handful of weeks when the sun is warm and the days are long. The crops grow fast, and the children run barefoot in the fields. The merchants come in greater numbers, their boats piled high with amphory of wine, with fine pottery, with news from the heart of the empire. They speak of the emperor, of wars in distant provinces, of the games in Rome. The frontier families listen, but these stories feel like tales from another world. They are more interested in the price of iron, in the quality of the cloth. Autumn is the season of harvest, of preparation, of a particular golden light that slants through the trees and makes the thatch glow. It is also the season of illness. The changeable weather, the damp, the gathering of people in close quarters, all conspire to spread fevers and coughs. Livia has lost a child before, a baby who died in the first winter. She does not speak of it, but the memory is a weight she carries. She watches her two living children with a vigilance that never sleeps. When Aelia sneezes, Livia's hand goes to her forehead. When Gaius complains of a headache, she makes him drink an infusion of willow bark. She knows the signs. She knows that a small fever can become a big one, that a cough can turn to a rattle in the chest, that there is no easy remedy. And so she does what she can. She boils water. She changes the bedding. She whispers prayers to the household gods, to the spirits of the ancestors, to any force that might listen. The children, of course, do not understand the full weight of their mother's worry. They live in the present, in the world of knucklebones and muddy feet, and the excitement of a passing cart. Gaius is already learning the ways of the fort. He follows his father sometimes, watching the soldiers drill, fascinated by the glint of armor and the thud of shields. He dreams of being a soldier himself, of marching with the eagles. His sister, Aelia, is more practical. She helps her mother with the hives, learning to move slowly and calmly so the bees do not sting. She has a way with animals. The goat follows her around the yard, and the chickens come when she calls. She has a gift, Livia thinks, a patience that will serve her well. And so the days pass. The frontier is a place of small dramas. A cow wanders off and is found in the neighbor's field. A cart gets stuck in the mud and requires a dozen men to pull it free. A letter arrives from a distant relative, written on a scrap of papyrus, and it is read aloud 3 times until every word is memorized. The blacksmith's apprentice burns his hand, and the whole vicus talks about it for a week. These are the events that fill the lives of people who live at the edge. There are no great wars fought in this valley, no grand triumphs, just the steady, unglamorous work of staying alive. But there is also beauty. There is the sight of the sun setting over the river, painting the water in shades of copper and rose. There is the sound of birds at dawn, the first light catching the dew on the grass. There is the taste of fresh bread, still warm, spread with a thin layer of honey. There is the feeling of a child's small hand in yours, the weight of trust. These are the things that make the hardship bearable. These are the things that turn a garrison town into a home. Let us drift further now into the deeper layers of this world. Consider the role of the gods. The Romans brought their pantheon with them, of course. There is a small temple in the fort dedicated to Jupiter and Mars, and the soldiers offer incense there on feast days. But the frontier has its own spirits. The river has a god, a figure half seen in the mist. The forest has a goddess, older than Rome, who is honored with small offerings left at the base of a certain oak tree. The families who live here, the ones who have been here for generations, have learned to pay respect to both. It is not hypocrisy. It is a kind of wisdom. You do not know which power might be listening. And so Livia keeps a small shrine in the corner of the house, with a little clay figure of a local goddess of the hearth, alongside a tiny bronze image of the Roman Lares. She lights a lamp there every evening, a small flame that flickers in the draught. It is a custom, a ritual, a thread that connects her to the past and to the future. The children learn these rituals by osmosis. Gaius knows to touch the door lintel for luck before leaving the house. Aelia knows to leave a crust of bread on the windowsill for the house spirit. They do not question why. It is simply the way things are done. And perhaps that is the deepest survival strategy of all, the preservation of tradition. When the world is uncertain, when the empire feels far away, and the tribes are restless, you hold on to the things your mother taught you. You repeat the prayers. You keep the festivals. You tell the stories. And in doing so, you make a small patch of order in a chaotic world. Now, let us talk about the children who grow up on the frontier. They grow up fast. By the age of 10, Gaius can already handle a knife, knows how to start a fire, can identify which berries are safe to eat. He has seen a man die, a soldier who was wounded in a skirmish and did not survive the night. He has seen a baby born, his own little sister, when he was 4. He knows that life is fragile and that death is always near. But he is not haunted by this knowledge. It is simply a fact, like the cold in winter or the heat in summer. The frontier does not allow for sentimentality. It demands pragmatism. Aelia, too, is learning the skills she will need. She can weave a little, though her fingers are still clumsy. She can milk the goat, churn butter, recognize the first signs of illness in a chicken. She has a quiet seriousness about her, a way of watching the adults and learning from their mistakes. She will not marry until she is older, perhaps 18 or 20, which is late by Roman standards. But here on the frontier, marriages are often delayed. There is work to be done, and a daughter's hands are needed at home. When she does marry, it will likely be to a soldier or a farmer, a man who knows the harshness of this life. She will bring to that marriage her own knowledge, her own strength. She will be a partner, not a possession. The frontier has a way of leveling things. And what of the soldiers themselves? They are not all hardened veterans. Some are young, barely out of their teens, sent to this far corner of the empire to serve their 25 years. They come from all over, from Spain, from Gaul, from Syria, from Africa. They bring with them their own languages, their own gods, their own recipes. The garrison is a melting pot, a place where a man from the deserts of North Africa might share a meal with a man from the forests of Germania. They learn to communicate in a rough Latin, peppered with slang and local words. They complain about the cold, about the food, about the officers. They write letters home, though many of those letters never arrive. They dream of discharge, of a plot of land, of a peaceful old age. Some of them find that peace here, marrying local women, settling down in the vicus after their service ends. Others die here, their names carved on a stone that will soon be overgrown. The frontier is a place of endings and beginnings. Every generation, a new cohort of children is born. A new batch of recruits arrives. The old die, the young grow, and the cycle continues. The empire may fall one day, but that is a future no one here imagines. They live in the present, in the immediate, in the small victories of the day. A good harvest, a healthy child, a roof that does not leak. These are the benchmarks of success. And so, as the night wears on and the fire is now just embers, Marcus gets up to add another log. He stirs the ashes, and a few sparks rise, swirling upward into the darkness. Livia sets down her sewing and stretches. She looks at her husband, at the lines on his face, at the gray that is starting to show in his hair. She remembers the first time she saw him, a young soldier, awkward and earnest, trying to impress her with a story about a bear. She had laughed, not because the story was funny, but because he was so eager. They have been together for 12 years now. 12 winters, 12 springs, 12 harvests. It does not seem like a long time, and yet it is the whole of her adult life. She reaches out and touches his hand. He looks up, and for a moment, they just look at each other. No words are needed. They are both tired. They are both grateful. They are both still here. The children stir in their sleep. Alia murmurs something, a word that sounds like a dream. Gaius rolls over, his arm flopping across his sister's face. She pushes it away without waking. The house breathes around them. The walls, made of timber and mud and straw, hold the heat of the day. The roof, patched and repaired a dozen times, keeps out the rain. The door, heavy oak with iron hinges, is barred. For now, they are safe. For now, they are warm. For now, they are together. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. There will be work and worry and the endless negotiation of survival. But tonight, there is only this: the soft crackle of the fire, the steady breathing of the sleeping children, the comfort of another body beside you in the dark. This is how they survive, not through heroics, not through grand strategy, but through the simple, stubborn act of living, day by day, night by night. Let us leave them there, in that small house on the edge of the empire. The wind is still blowing, the river is still flowing, the stars are still turning in their slow arc. The world is vast and indifferent, but here, in this one room, there is warmth. There is love. There is a family holding on. And that, perhaps, is the truest story of the Roman frontier. Not the walls, not the legions, not the emperors, but the hearth fires that burned in 1,000 small settlements, the hands that kneaded bread and mended clothes, the voices that sang lullabies in the dark. They are gone now, those families. The houses have crumbled, the fort has fallen, the land has returned to grass and forest. But the pattern of their lives, the shape of their days, is still with us. In the way we build our own homes, in the way we care for our own children, in the way we find hope in the middle of uncertainty. They are our ancestors, in a way. They are the ones who showed us that survival is not about strength alone, but about endurance, about adaptation, about the small acts of kindness that bind a family together. So when you find yourself late at night, listening to a story like this, you are part of that long chain. You are continuing the tradition. You are sitting by your own hearth, in your own home, and you are remembering. And that is a quiet kind of magic. That is how we keep the frontier alive, long after the last legion has marched away. And yet, the frontier was not only a place of quiet hearth fires. There were also times of gathering when the vicus came alive. Once a month, on a day that was not quite a market day, but something more informal, the people of the settlement would converge on a wide space near the fort's granary. It was not a grand affair. There were no marble columns, no loud announcements. But it was a moment when the isolation of daily life gave way to a slow, gentle bustle. Families would walk from their scattered farms, carrying baskets of eggs, wheels of cheese, bundles of dried herbs. A trader from the south, with a cart of pottery and iron tools, would set up under a canvas awning. Another man, who had served in the legion and now kept a small herd of goats, would offer skins of milk and bowls of fresh curd. The air would fill with the sound of low voices, the clucking of chickens, the occasional bray of a donkey. Children ran between the legs of adults, chasing a stray dog or each other, their laughter mixing with the calls of the vendors. It was on one such day that Alia, now perhaps 11 years old, experienced her first real taste of something like commerce. Her mother had given her a small clay pot of honey, carefully sealed with beeswax, and told her to trade it for a length of wool thread. Alia clutched the pot to her chest as she walked through the crowd, her eyes scanning the stalls. She felt the weight of the transaction. It was her first independent errand, a small step toward adulthood. She found a woman selling wool, a former soldier's wife from Gaul, with broad hands and a kind face. The woman looked at the honey, sniffed it, and nodded. She handed Alia a skein of soft, undyed wool, and then, as if it were an afterthought, she gave her a small piece of dried apple. Alia smiled, a rare expression on her usually serious face. She tucked the apple into her pocket and carried the wool back to her mother, feeling a quiet pride. It was a small victory, but on the frontier, small victories were the currency of survival. The market gatherings were also a time for news. News traveled slowly here. A letter from Rome might take months, if it arrived at all. But a trader from the east, or a legionary returning from a patrol, would bring stories. They spoke of a rebellion in the north, a new emperor in the city, a plague in the eastern provinces. The people listened, nodded, and then went back to their business. The news felt distant, like a story from another world. What mattered more was the local gossip, who had a new baby, whose cow had calved, which farmer's roof had collapsed in the last storm. These were the real events that shaped their lives. The empire, with all its grandeur, was a backdrop. The frontier was the stage. As the seasons turned, the rhythm of life shifted. Autumn was a time of urgency. The air grew crisp, and the leaves of the few trees along the river turned gold and red. Marcus would spend long days in the fields, harvesting the last of the grain, while Livia worked in the garden, pulling up root vegetables and hanging herbs from the rafters to dry. The children were pressed into service. Gaius helped with the thrashing, his young muscles aching by the end of the day. Aelia learned to preserve meat by salting it, her hands growing red and raw from the coarse salt. It was hard work, but there was a satisfaction in it. Every jar of pickled cabbage, every string of dried onions, was a promise of survival through the winter. The house became a storehouse of small provisions. The pantry shelves, rough-hewn planks, filled with pots and sacks and clay vessels. The smell of smoked pork and dried apples hung in the air, and when the first snow fell, it was a relief. The work was done. The family could rest. The days grew short and the nights long. Marcus would spend hours repairing tools, sharpening knives, mending the harness of the plow. Livia would spin wool into thread, her hands moving in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The children would sit by the fire, playing with knuckle bones or listening to stories. Sometimes Marcus would tell a story from his time in the Legion. He spoke of the long marches, the cold nights on patrol, the strange customs of the tribes he had encountered. He told of a place where the rivers ran with fish, so thick you could scoop them out with your hands, and of a winter so cold that the wine froze in the skin. He did not speak of battles. Perhaps he had never seen one, or perhaps he did not want to remember. The children did not ask. They preferred the stories of strange animals and faraway lands. Livia, too, told stories. She had learned them from her mother, who had learned them from her mother, back in the village on the other side of the mountains. Some were Roman tales about the founding of the city and the gods. Others were older, deeper, rooted in the land itself. She told of a spirit that lived in the river, a creature with silver scales and eyes like dark stones, who would grant a wish to anyone who left a coin at the water's edge. Gaius would sometimes sneak down to the river, hoping to see the spirit, but he only ever saw the ripples of the current. Aelia believed the stories, but she did not need to see proof. The stories were enough. They made the world feel enchanted, even in its harshness. Winter also brought the festival of Saturnalia, a time of inversion and mischief. The garrison would celebrate with a feast, and the vicus would join. Marcus would bring the family to the fort's headquarters, where a large hall was decorated with pine branches and candles. There was music, a rough sort of piping and drumming, and there was wine, though the children were given a watered-down version. The soldiers would put on masks and play at being slaves, and the officers would serve them. It was a strange, chaotic night, full of laughter and shouting. Aelia remembered one year when a centurion, normally a stern man, danced a jig with a goat on a leash. It was absurd, and she laughed until her stomach hurt. For one night, the hierarchy of the frontier was turned upside down. Even the gods were said to roam the earth, and no one was punished for games or pranks. It was a release, a brief escape from the weight of survival. But the winter also brought danger. There were nights when the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the snow piled up against the door. The family would huddle together under blankets, listening to the storm. Sometimes a neighbor would knock, seeking shelter. Livia never turned anyone away. She would offer a bowl of hot stew and a place by the fire. There was an unspoken code on the frontier. You helped each other because tomorrow it might be you who needed help. The storm might pass, or it might last for days. No one knew. They simply waited and trusted that the sun would return. And it always did. The spring came slowly, a tentative warmth that melted the snow and revealed the muddy ground. The river swelled, carrying away the debris of winter. The birds returned, and the lizards appeared on the sunny rocks. The family would emerge from the house, blinking in the light, and begin the cycle again. The fields needed plowing, the garden needed planting, the animals needed tending. It was a return to labor, but it was also a return to possibility. The frontier had a way of renewing itself, of pushing aside the memory of hardship and focusing on the promise of the new year. It was in such a spring that a change came to the Vicus. A new centurion arrived, a man from Italy, with a wife and a young daughter. The wife, whose name was Octavia, was not accustomed to the frontier. She complained about the mud, the flies, the lack of a proper bath. The local women, Livia among them, watched her with a mixture of sympathy and hidden amusement. They knew that she would either adapt or leave. Within a few weeks, Octavia had learned to wear sturdy boots, to ignore the smell of the tannery, and to bargain with the traders. She became a familiar figure, walking to the river with her daughter, a small girl who was shy and curious. The children of the Vicus soon drew her into their games. It was a small reminder that the frontier was not only a place of survival. It was also a place of new beginnings, of families and friendships, of lives that might have been lived differently elsewhere, but were now woven into the fabric of this hard land. And as the years passed, the children grew. Gaius became a young man, his shoulders broad, his hands calloused. He helped his father in the fields, but he also spent time at the fort, learning from the soldiers. He could throw a spear, use a sword in a basic way, and ride a horse with a clumsy but steady confidence. It was not a life he had chosen, but it was the life that had chosen him. He would probably serve in the auxiliaries when he was old enough, perhaps marry a local girl, and settle down not far from where he had grown up. Aelia, too, was approaching womanhood. She had learned to manage a household, to barter, to heal small wounds with herbs. She had a quiet beauty, not the polished beauty of a Roman lady, but something weathered and real. She would marry a farmer, or perhaps a veteran, and she would become the center of her own small world, just as her mother had done. The family had survived. They had weathered disease, scarcity, and the slow erosion of hope that sometimes came with the frontier. But they had also found moments of joy, of connection, of meaning. The shrine in the corner still burned its little lamp every evening. The door lintel was still touched for luck. The stories were still told, passed from parent to child, from one generation to the next. The frontier did not break them. It shaped them like the river shapes the stone, slowly and inexorably. And now the night has deepened. The fire has burned low, and the embers glow with a soft orange light. The family has gone to sleep, but outside the fort stands silent. The sentries walk their rounds, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. The river murmurs, never stopping, never resting. The stars wheel overhead, ancient and indifferent. The frontier is vast, and the empire is distant. But here, in this small house, the hearth fire still holds a breath of warmth. And that warmth, that quiet persistence, is the story of an edge of the world. It is a story that never really ends, because it is a story of life itself. So let the wind blow, and let the night be long. The family sleeps, and the frontier holds them, as it has always done, and as it will do, for as long as there are people who call this place home. The family sleeps, and the frontier holds them, as it has always done, and as it will do, for as long as there are people who call this place home. But the night does not stay frozen. The seasons turn, and the years pass, and the small house by the Vicus sees its share of changes. Gaius, the boy who once threw stones at passing cavalrymen, becomes a young man with a quiet sense of purpose. He has grown tall, taller than his father, and his hands have the rough, capable look of someone who has worked the land since childhood. He no longer dreams of the legions in the same way. The stories of faraway battles and heroic deeds have faded, replaced by a more immediate understanding of what it means to live at the edge of the empire. He knows that the frontier is not a place of glory. It is a place of mud and sweat and patience. And he has learned to be patient. One evening in the late summer, when the air is thick with the scent of ripening grain, Gaius tells his parents that he has been speaking with a veteran named Lucius, who lives at the far end of the Vicus. Lucius served in the 2nd Augusta Legion for 25 years, and now he tends a small vineyard, coaxing wine from the reluctant soil of the frontier. He has a daughter, a girl named Flavia, who is known for her steady hands and her quiet laugh. Gaius does not say much about her, but his mother notices the way he looks down when he speaks her name. Livia says nothing, but she smiles to herself because she knows the signs. She knew them when she was young, and she knows them now. The wedding is held in the autumn after the harvest is in. It is a simple affair, as most things are on the frontier. There is no grand procession, no lavish feast. The couple exchanges vows in front of a small altar, with a few neighbors and the local priest looking on. Flavia wears a plain wool dress, dyed a soft yellow with saffron, and she carries a small bunch of dried herbs, because fresh flowers are scarce that time of year. Gaius wears his best tunic, the one his mother mended carefully the night before. They share a cup of wine, and the soldiers from the fort raise a cheer. It is a good day, a day of warmth and laughter, and when the sun sets, the young couple walks to their new home, a small house on the edge of the Vicus that Lucius helped them build. The house is modest, even by frontier standards. It has 2 rooms, a hearth, and a small yard where they will keep a goat and a few chickens. The walls are made of wattle and daub, the same as the house Gaius grew up in, and the roof is thatched with reeds from the river. But it is theirs, and that is enough. Flavia settles into the rhythm of the Vicus quickly. She is used to hard work, and she does not complain about the mud or the cold or the endless labor. She and Livia become close, sharing recipes and remedies, trading gossip about the other families. They work together in the garden, planting beans and leeks and a few rows of turnips. They talk about the children they hope to have and the future they are building. It is a quiet, steady life, the kind of life that does not make its way into the histories of the empire, but the kind of life that keeps the empire alive, one small household at a time. Alia, meanwhile, has taken a different path. She has always been the quieter of the two children, the one who watched and listened and remembered. When she was young, she learned to read from a retired officer who lived in the Vicus, a man named Valerius, who had brought a small library of scrolls with him from Rome. He taught her the letters, the words, the stories of the poets and philosophers. It was an unusual education for a girl on the frontier, but Valerius was an unusual man. He had no children of his own, and he saw in Alia a spark of curiosity that he wanted to nurture. So he taught her patiently, and she devoured every word. Now, at 19, Alia works as a scribe for the garrison. She writes letters home for soldiers who cannot write, recording their words in careful, even script. Sometimes the letters are joyful, full of news of a promotion or a new child. Sometimes they are sad, messages of condolence or farewell. Alia writes them all with the same steady hand, never flinching, never letting her emotions show. But at night, alone in her small room, she sometimes thinks about the words she has written and the lives they represent. The frontier is full of stories, and she has become the keeper of many of them. She has also become something of a historian in her own quiet way. She keeps a journal, a collection of observations and anecdotes about life on the frontier. She writes about the festivals, the storms, the visitors who pass through the fort. She records the names of the soldiers who come and go, the merchants who set up their stalls in the Vicus, the local tribespeople who come to trade. She writes about the small moments, the details that will be forgotten if no one remembers them. The way the light falls on the river in the evening, the sound of the wind in the reeds, the smell of bread baking in the communal oven. She does not know if anyone will ever read her journal, but it does not matter. The act of writing, of preserving, is its own reward. The years continue to pass, and the frontier remains the same in its essential character. Yet it is always changing, always shifting. New families arrive, drawn by the promise of land or the hope of a fresh start. Old families leave, their hopes dashed by a bad harvest or a death, or the simple exhaustion of living at the edge of the world. The fort itself undergoes changes. A new commander arrives, a man from Gaul who is stricter than the last, and the soldiers find themselves drilling more often, preparing for skirmishes that may or may not come. The tribes beyond the wall, never entirely pacified, grow restless in the spring, and there are reports of raids, of cattle stolen and houses burned. The garrisons respond with patrols, with shows of force, but the tension never entirely goes away. One winter, a man arrives in the Vicus who changes everything. His name is Severus, a merchant from the east, and he comes with a wagon full of goods that no one has seen before. He has spices, cinnamon and pepper, that fill the air with a warm, exotic aroma. He has silk, soft and shimmering, that makes the women of the Vicus gasp. He has glassware, delicate and translucent, that catches the light like captured sunlight. And he has news, news from the heart of the empire, news that is both exciting and unsettling. Severus tells of a new emperor, a man named Septimius Severus, who has risen to power through blood and ambition. There has been civil war, he says, and the empire has been torn apart by rival claimants. But now there is order, or at least a kind of order, and the new emperor is turning his attention to the frontiers. He plans to strengthen the borders, to build new walls, to increase the garrisons. He is a soldier, Severus says, a man who understands the importance of the edges of the empire. And this, for the people of the Vicus, is both a promise and a threat. The news spreads through the settlement like a slow fire. Some are hopeful, believing that the new emperor will bring stability, will send more supplies and more soldiers, will make the frontier safer. Others are fearful, remembering that every emperor brings change, and change is rarely comfortable for the poor. Marcus, now an old man with gray hair and a stooped back, sits by the fire and listens to the talk. He says little, but his eyes are wistful. He remembers the promises of other emperors, the grand plans that never quite reached the edge of the world. He has learned to be skeptical, but he does not say so aloud. It is not his way. Livia, too, listens, but her mind is elsewhere. She thinks about her children, about the future they will face. She thinks about the stories she has told, the traditions she has passed down, the small acts of survival that have defined her life. She wonders if the new emperor will make any difference to the turnips in the garden, to the goat in the yard, to the quiet evenings by the hearth. She doubts it. The frontier has a way of absorbing change, of muting its impact, of continuing on its own slow course, regardless of who rules in Rome. The emperor is a distant figure, a name on a coin, a face on a statue. The river, though, the river is real. The wind is real. The cold is real. And those are the things that matter. The winter deepens, and the nights grow longer. Severus stays in the Vicus, setting up a small shop where he sells his wares. He is a talkative man, full of stories about the cities he has visited, the wonders he has seen. He tells of the great markets of Alexandria, where you can buy anything in the world. He tells of the palaces of Constantinople, gleaming with marble and gold. He tells of the temples of the East, where strange gods are worshipped with incense and chanting. The children of the Vicus gather around him, their eyes wide, their imaginations kindled. Even the adults listen, drawn by the promise of a world beyond the mud and the rain and the endless labor. But Severus also brings news of another kind. He tells of the plague that swept through the eastern provinces, killing thousands. He tells of the tribes beyond the Danube who are growing stronger, who are pushing against the borders of the empire. He tells of the cost of war, the taxes, the conscriptions, the families torn apart. The Vicus listens, and the mood changes. The stories of distant wonders are balanced by the stories of distant horrors, and the frontier, for all its harshness, begins to feel almost like a refuge. One evening, after Severus has finished his tales, Aelia walks home alone. The stars are out, and the air is cold and clean. She thinks about the stories she has heard, and she thinks about the stories she has written. She wonders if the empire will last, if the frontier will hold, if the life her family has built will endure. She does not know the answers, but she knows that the river still flows, that the fire still burns, that the people of the Vicus will rise tomorrow and do what they have always done. They will work, they will hope, they will survive. And that, she decides, is enough. In the spring, the new emperor's policies begin to take effect. A cohort of fresh soldiers arrives at the fort, young men from Italia and Gaul and Africa, their faces bright with the naive confidence of those who have not yet seen a real battle. They drill in the parade ground, their armor gleaming, their steps precise. The veterans watch them with a mixture of amusement and pity. They know what is coming. They know that the frontier will strip away that confidence, will replace it with something harder and quieter. But they do not say anything. The young must learn for themselves. The Vicus expands to accommodate the new arrivals. More houses are built, more shops open, more children run through the muddy streets. The tannery grows busier, the smell more pungent. The tavern does a brisk trade, and the soldiers spend their pay on wine and dice, and the company of the women who work there. It is a rough, boisterous place, full of noise and energy. But beneath the surface, the old rhythms remain. The farmers still rise before dawn. The women still tend the gardens. The children still play in the dust. The frontier absorbs the new arrivals as it has absorbed everything else, and life continues. Gaius and Flavia have a child, a boy they name Lucius after Flavia's father. He is a healthy child with a loud cry and a determined grip. The family gathers to welcome him, and Marcus holds him in his old, trembling hands, looking down at the tiny face with something like wonder. He tells the baby a story, the same story he told his own children, about the place where the rivers ran with fish and the wine froze in the skin. The baby does not understand, but he seems to listen, his eyes fixed on the old man's face. And in that moment, the frontier feels almost timeless, as if the generations are linked by something deeper than blood, by the shared experience of survival. Aelia, meanwhile, has begun to teach writing to a few of the children in the Vicus. She gathers them in Valerius's old house, now empty since his death, and she shows them the letters, the words, the way stories can be captured on parchment. Some of the children are restless, uninterested, but a few, a girl named Julia and a boy named Quintus, take to it with a hunger that reminds Aelia of herself. She gives them old scrolls to practice on, and she watches their progress with a quiet pride. She is passing on what she has learned, and in doing so, she is ensuring that the frontier will have its own scribes, its own keepers of memory. And so the years continue to turn, slowly and steadily, like the seasons themselves. The frontier is not a place of dramatic events, though events do happen. It is a place of accumulation, of small moments building on each other, of lives lived in the margins of history. The empire may rise and fall, but the families who live along its edges will find a way to endure. They will adapt. They will compromise. They will keep their own customs, tell their own stories, raise their own children. And when the soldiers leave and the forts crumble, when the walls fall and the empire becomes a memory, something of this life will remain. Because the frontier is not a wall, it is not a line on a map. It is a place where people have chosen to make a home. And that choice, that stubborn, quiet, unglamorous choice, is the most powerful force of all. The night is still deep, and the fire has burned to ash. But the embers still glow, a faint, warm light that will last until dawn. The family sleeps, and the frontier holds them. And outside, beyond the walls, beyond the vicus, beyond the river, the world stretches on, vast and dark, and full of stories that have not yet been told. But those are stories for another night. For now, the hearth is warm, and the sleep is deep, and the frontier is at peace. But peace on the frontier is never permanent. It is more like a pause between breaths, a moment of stillness before the next gust of wind. And even as the family sleeps, even as the embers fade, the world outside continues its slow, patient work. The river shifts a little in its bed, carving a new curve in the bank. The wind carries the scent of snow from the distant mountains. A wolf howls somewhere in the forest, a sound that is both close and far, wrapped in the darkness like a thread of silver. The sentries on the wall hear it, and they shift their weight, and they think of home, but they do not speak. There is nothing to say. The frontier is full of sounds that mean nothing and everything at once. You might imagine that morning comes slowly, reluctantly, as if the night is unwilling to let go. And perhaps it is. The winter has been long, and the spring is still uncertain, a promise that has not yet been fulfilled. But the sun does rise, pale and thin, casting long shadows across the thawing ground. The frost on the rooftops begins to glisten, then to drip, and the streets of the vicus turn to mud once more. It is the kind of mud that clings to everything, that makes walking feel like a small battle, that seeps into the fibers of clothing and the cracks in the walls. The people of the frontier are used to it. They do not complain. They simply lift their feet a little higher and go about their business. Livia is the first to rise, as she has been for as many years as she can remember. She stirs the embers, adds a few sticks, and watches the flames catch. The fire crackles, and the sound is comforting, a small anchor in the gray morning. She puts a pot of water on to heat, and she goes out to the yard to check on the goat. The goat is old now, its milk thin, but it is still a part of the household, a living thing that depends on her. She speaks to it softly, as she always does, and the goat blinks its slow, patient eyes. There is a rhythm to these visits, a ritual that has nothing to do with the empire or the emperor or the politics of distant Rome. It is just a woman and a goat sharing a moment in the cold dawn, and that is enough. Inside, the children begin to stir. Lucius, the baby, lets out a cry that is more insistent than the last, and Flavia lifts him from his cradle, her movements heavy with the sleepy grace of a young mother. Gaius is already dressing, pulling on his tunic and his heavy wool cloak. He will spend the day in the fields, preparing the ground for planting, turning the soil with a plow that is older than he is. The work is hard and repetitive, but he does not resent it. He has seen what happens to men who resent their labor. They grow bitter, and then they grow old, and then they die. Gaius prefers to keep his mind on the present, on the feel of the earth, on the simple satisfaction of a straight furrow. He kisses Flavia on the forehead, takes a piece of bread from the table, and steps out into the morning. The vicus is waking too. The baker has lit his oven, and the smell of fresh bread drifts through the streets, mixing with the smoke from a dozen chimneys. The smith is already at his forge, the ring of his hammer a steady, metallic heartbeat. The children who are not needed in the fields or the gardens begin to gather near Alia's house, waiting for their lessons. They are not always eager. Some would rather be playing or fishing or doing nothing at all. But their parents have sent them, and so they come, dragging their feet through the mud, clutching their slates and their bits of charcoal. Alia greets them at the door, her face calm and her voice gentle. She does not scold them for their reluctance. She knows that learning to read and write is a strange and difficult thing, especially when the world around you demands so much more practical skill. But she also knows that writing is a kind of power, a way of holding on to things that would otherwise slip away. She begins the lesson with a story, as she often does. Today, she tells them about a young girl who lived in a village by the sea, a girl who dreamed of faraway lands and wrote her dreams on scraps of papyrus. The children listen, some more attentively than others, but all of them quiet, drawn into the tale. Julia, the girl who shows the most promise, asks a question. Did the girl ever get to see those faraway lands? Alia smiles. That is a good question. Some stories say she did. Others say she never left her village. But the important thing is that she wrote about them. Because of her writing, her dreams are still alive, even though she has been dead for hundreds of years. Julia nods, and she looks down at her slate, and she begins to copy the letters that Alia has drawn. Her hand is still unsteady, but there is a determination in her eyes that reminds Alia of herself many years ago, when Valerius first taught her to form the curves of the alphabet. It is a quiet moment, but it is also a powerful one. In this small room on this muddy frontier, the future is being written, letter by letter, word by word. Outside, the day continues its slow progress. The soldiers drill, the farmers plow. The women tend to the endless tasks of cooking and cleaning and mending. A messenger arrives from the fort, his horse lathered and tired. He brings news that the emperor has ordered the construction of a new watchtower farther up the river to better monitor the movements of the tribes beyond the frontier. News spreads through the vicus, and men gather in small groups to discuss it. Some see it as a sign of strength, a demonstration that the empire is still committed to defending its borders. Others see it as a waste of resources, a vanity project that will do nothing to stop the real threats. Marcus, sitting outside his house on an old stool, listens to the arguments and says nothing. He has seen watchtowers before. They are built and they are manned, and sometimes they are burned and then they are built again. It is the way of things. But the young soldiers, the ones who arrived in the spring, are excited by the news. They talk about the glory of serving in a frontier post, about the honor of guarding the empire. They do not yet understand that the frontier is not about glory. It is about endurance. It is about standing in the cold for hours, watching for something that may never come. It is about eating the same food, sleeping in the same cramped quarters, listening to the same wind day after day. The veterans know this, but they do not say anything. The young will learn. As the afternoon wears on, the sky clouds over, and a light rain begins to fall. It is not a storm, not the kind of downpour that sends everyone scrambling for cover. It is a gentle, persistent rain, the kind that soaks into everything, that makes the world smell of wet earth and damp wool. The children are sent home from their lessons early, and they run through the streets, laughing, their voices bright against the gray. Alia stands in her doorway, watching them, and she feels a quiet contentment. She does not know what the future holds. She does not know if the empire will last, if the frontier will hold, if the stories she is teaching will survive. But she knows that today, in this moment, there is laughter, there is rain, there is life, and that, she thinks again, is enough. As evening falls, the families gather in their homes. The fires are lit, the pots are set to simmer, and the stories begin. It is a ritual as old as the settlement, older even than the fort. The children sit close to the hearth, their faces lit by the flames, and the adults take turns telling tales. Some are old stories, passed down from generation to generation, stories of gods and heroes and the founding of Rome. Others are new, stories from the frontier itself, stories of the people who have lived and died in this place. Tonight, it is Gaius who speaks. He tells the story of a man named Antonius, a farmer who came to the frontier many years ago, before the Vicus was even a village. Antonius built his house with his own hands, cleared the land with his own strength, and raised his family in the shadow of the wall. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was just a man who wanted a piece of land to call his own. And he got it, but at a cost. The soil was poor, the winters harsh, the raids frequent. His wife died young, his eldest son was killed in a skirmish, and his daughter was married off to a trader and moved to a town far away. Antonius grew old and alone, but he never left. He stayed on his land, tending his crops, repairing his roof, waiting for the end. The children listen, their eyes wide. They have heard this story before, but it never loses its power. They ask questions. Was Antonius happy? Did he regret his choice? Gaius shrugs. I don't know. He never said, but he stayed. And that means something. The story ends, and there is a moment of quiet. The fire pops. The rain continues to fall outside, a soft, steady whisper. And then Flavia begins to sing, a lullaby from her own childhood, a song about the moon and the stars, and the dream of a peaceful night. The children's eyelids grow heavy. The adults lean back, their bodies relaxed, their minds drifting. The song fills the room, warm and familiar, and for a little while, the frontier feels less like a place of danger and more like a place of belonging. The night deepens and the rain turns to snow. Not a heavy snow, just a dusting. A thin white layer that covers the mud and the rooftops and the bare branches of the trees. The sentries on the wall pull their cloaks tighter, and they watch the snow fall, and they think about the warmth of the guardroom, but they do not complain. They are used to the cold. They have learned to accept it, just as they have learned to accept everything else the frontier gives them. In Marcus's house, the family prepares for sleep. The beds are narrow and hard, but they are warm, piled with blankets and furs. Lucius is already asleep, his small chest rising and falling in the faint light. Marcus lies down slowly, his old bones aching, and he stares at the ceiling for a long time. He is thinking about Antonius, the man from Gaius's story. He remembers him, a little, a tall, quiet man who kept to himself. Marcus had seen him at the market, selling vegetables, his hands gnarled and calloused. He had never spoken to him, not really. But now, in the quiet of the night, he feels a strange connection to him. They are the same kind of people, he thinks, the kind who stay. Livia settles beside him, and she feels his restlessness. She does not ask what is wrong. She simply places her hand on his, and they lie there in the dark, listening to the sound of the snow outside. The world is shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller, until it is just this room, this bed, this hand on his. And that is enough. Aelia, in her own house, is awake. She sits by her table, a candle burning low, and she writes. She is writing about the day, about the rain and the lessons and the laughter of the children. She is writing about Antonius, though she never knew him, and about the quiet dignity of a life lived on the edge. She writes because she has to, because the words demand to be set down, because the memory of this place and these people must not be lost. She writes until the candle gutters and the ink runs dry, and then she blows out the flame and climbs into her bed. The snow continues to fall, covering the vicus in a soft, white silence, and the frontier, for all its harshness, for all its solitude and struggle, is beautiful in its own way. Not the beauty of marble and gold, but the beauty of something real, something that has been shaped by wind and rain and the hands of ordinary people. It is a beauty that does not demand attention, that does not announce itself. It is just there in the quiet of the night, waiting to be noticed by those who have the patience to see. And you, listening from your own quiet place, perhaps far from any frontier, perhaps wrapped in your own blanket of comfort, can imagine that snow falling, can feel the cold air and the stillness. You can imagine the small glow of the hearth, the sound of breathing, the weight of history pressing gently on the present. It is a strange thing to be connected to these people across so many centuries, but the connection is real. They lived and they loved and they survived. And their stories, whether written or spoken or simply remembered, are still here, waiting to be found. So the night continues, and the frontier sleeps, and the snow covers everything like a promise of renewal. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, and the snow will melt, and the mud will return, and the work will begin again. But tonight, there is only this: the dark, the cold, the quiet, and the fragile, enduring thread of human life. The snow continues to fall through the deepest part of the night, and the frontier settles into a stillness that feels almost sacred. The animals in their pens are quiet, the dogs curled tight against the cold, the horses breathing softly in the dark. The sentries on the wall shift their weight from one foot to the other, their breath forming small clouds that vanish into the night. They do not speak much. There is nothing to say that has not been said 100 times before. The snow is beautiful. The snow is cold. The snow will melt in the morning. And then there will be mud again, and the cycle will continue. But for now, in this moment, the world is hushed. The fort, the vicus, the wall, all of it is wrapped in a pale blanket, and the rough edges of the frontier are softened. The sharp stones, the splintered wood, the piles of refuse that accumulate behind the houses, all of it is hidden, made gentle. It is a kind of grace, this snow, a pause, a breath. Inside the houses, the fires burn low. The embers glow orange and red, casting shadows that dance across the walls. The children sleep, their dreams filled with the stories they heard by the hearth. They dream of Antonius, the lonely farmer, but in their dreams he is not lonely. He is surrounded by a great harvest, by fields of golden wheat, by a wife who laughs and a son who lives. The children's minds reshape the past into something kinder, and that is a gift of sleep, of youth, of the frontier itself, the ability to imagine a better ending. In one of the smaller houses, near the edge of the vicus, an old woman named Marcella lies awake. She is very old, older than anyone in the settlement, and she remembers things that no one else remembers. She remembers when the fort was first built, when the trees were taller and the river ran clearer. She remembers the first families who came, the ones who did not survive the first winter. She remembers the smell of the fires, the taste of the air, the sound of the wolves howling in the distance. She has seen so much that the years have blurred together, and sometimes she cannot tell if a memory is real or if she dreamed it. But tonight, as the snow falls, she remembers a particular night long ago, a night very much like this one. She was young then, barely a girl, and she had come to the frontier with her father, a retired soldier who had been given a plot of land. They had built a hut, a rough thing of timber and mud, and they had huddled together through the cold. On that night, the snow had fallen just as it fell now, and her father had told her a story. He told her about the city of Rome, which he had seen once as a young man. He described the marble buildings, the crowded streets, the fountains that seemed to never stop flowing. He described the noise, the heat, the smell of bread and oil and sweat. And then he said, "But this is better." Marcella had not understood then. She had thought her father was lying, trying to make her feel better about the cold and the hunger. But now, so many years later, she understands. The frontier is hard, but it is hers. The land is hers. The silence is hers. And there is a kind of freedom in that, a freedom that the crowded streets of Rome could never offer. Marcella smiles a little in the dark. She does not have teeth left, not many, and her smile is a thin, dry thing, but it is real. She closes her eyes, and she lets the memory drift away. She is tired, more tired than she used to be, and sleep comes easily now. It comes like the snow, gentle and patient, covering everything. The night passes. The stars wheel slowly overhead, hidden behind the clouds, but the snow catches what little light there is and reflects it, so that the world is not quite dark. It is a soft, muted glow, like the inside of a seashell. And in that glow, the frontier breathes. Dawn comes quietly, as it always does in winter. The light does not burst over the horizon. It seeps in, pale and gray, filling the sky with a milky brightness. The snow has stopped, but the clouds remain, thick and low, promising more. The sentries on the wall stamp their feet and rub their hands, and they watch the vicus stir to life. Smoke begins to rise from the chimneys, thin columns that hang in the still air before dispersing. The smell of cooking fires drifts through the settlement, and with it, the sound of voices, low and familiar. In the house of Marcus and Livia, the morning begins, as it always does. Marcus is the first to rise, his joints protesting as he swings his legs over the edge of the bed. He dresses slowly, pulling on a wool tunic and a pair of boots that have been repaired so many times that they are more stitches than leather. He lights the fire, using the embers from the night before, and soon the small flame is crackling. Livia follows a few minutes later, her hair loose, her face soft with sleep. She sets a pot of water over the fire to heat, and she begins to prepare the morning meal, a simple porridge of barley, flavored with a little salt and a drizzle of olive oil. It is not much, but it is warm, and it is enough. Lucius wakes last, as he always does, and he stumbles out of bed with his hair sticking up in every direction. He rubs his eyes and yawns, and he comes to sit by the fire, his small hands held out to the heat. Livia hands him a bowl of porridge, and he eats it slowly, still half asleep. No one talks. There is nothing to say that cannot wait. The morning is a quiet time, a time to gather strength for the day ahead. Outside, the vicus is coming to life. The blacksmith's hammer rings out, a steady, rhythmic beat that seems to set the pace for the entire settlement. The baker opens his shop, and the smell of fresh bread mixes with the smoke and the cold air. A group of children, bundled in layers of wool and fur, runs past, their feet crunching in the snow. They are heading to the schoolhouse, where Alia will be waiting, her hands folded, her voice calm, ready to lead them through another day of letters and numbers and stories. But today, Alia is not at the schoolhouse yet. She is standing in her doorway, looking out at the snow-covered vicus, and she is thinking about the night before. She is thinking about the story of Antonius and about the quiet dignity of a life lived without fanfare. She is thinking about her own life, here on the frontier, and about the choices that brought her here. She had been a teacher in a small town in Italy, a town with cobblestone streets and a market square and a temple to the local gods. She had been comfortable, safe, but she had wanted something more. She had wanted to see what the empire looked like at its edges, to understand how people lived when the protection of the legions was thin and the land was wild. And so she had come here, to this place, and she had found what she was looking for. She had found a community of people who were not extraordinary, not famous, not rich. They were just people. And that, she realized, was exactly what she had wanted to know. The frontier was not a place of epic battles and heroic deeds, not most of the time. It was a place of small moments, of mundane struggles, of quiet triumphs. It was a place where a woman could teach children to read, where a farmer could plant his crops, where a soldier could stand his watch, and all of it mattered. All of it was part of something larger, something that the historians and the poets would never write about. But it was real. Alia steps out of her doorway and begins to walk toward the schoolhouse. The snow is soft under her feet, and she takes her time, enjoying the quiet. She passes the blacksmith's shop, and she nods to the smith, a broad-shouldered man named Valerius, who is already covered in soot and sweat despite the cold. She passes the baker's shop, and the baker, a round woman named Junia, waves at her through the window. She passes the house where the old woman Marcella lives, and she sees that the door is open just a crack, and she hears Marcella humming a tune, a melody that seems to come from another time. The schoolhouse is a small building made of wood and daub, with a single room and a hearth at one end. Alia pushes open the door, and the warmth of the fire greets her. She sets her basket down on the table, where she keeps her wax tablets and her styluses, and she begins to arrange the room for the day. She straightens the benches, she adds a log to the fire, she places a fresh candle on the table. She is ready. The children arrive one by one, their cheeks red from the cold, their noses running. They stamp their feet on the threshold and then come inside, settling onto the benches with the practiced ease of habit. Alia watches them, and she feels the same quiet contentment she felt yesterday, watching them run through the rain. They are the future, these children. They are the ones who will carry the stories forward, who will tend the land, who will build the next generation of houses and forts and walls. They will face hardships that she cannot imagine, but they will also find joys that she cannot predict. And that is the nature of the frontier. It is uncertain, it is unpredictable, but it is alive. The morning proceeds as mornings do. Alia leads the children through their lessons, the letters scratched into the wax, the numbers counted on their fingers, the names of the emperors recited in a sing-song voice. She tells them about the founding of Rome, about Romulus and Remus, about the she-wolf who nursed them. She tells them about the Punic Wars, about the great generals and the terrible battles. But she also tells them about the frontier. She tells them about the people who live here, the soldiers and the farmers and the merchants, and she tells them that their own lives are part of the story. She tells them that they are not just learning history. They are making it. The children listen, some with more attention than others. The youngest ones fidget, their minds wandering to the snow outside, to the games they will play at lunchtime. The older ones, the ones who are almost adults, listen more carefully. They know that they will soon have to make choices. Some will join the army. Some will marry and start their own households. Some will leave, seeking opportunities in other towns, other provinces. And some will stay as their parents stayed, as Antonia stayed, because this place, this harsh, beautiful, difficult place, is home. At midday, the children are dismissed for lunch. They run out into the snow, their voices high and bright, and they begin to build a fort. It is a small fort, made of snow and imagination, but it is theirs. They pretend to be soldiers, defending the frontier against invisible enemies. They throw snowballs and laugh, and for a moment, the worries of the frontier, the raids, the cold, the uncertainty are forgotten. They are just children playing in the snow. Alia watches them from the doorway, and she smiles. She is thinking about her own childhood, about the games she played, about the stories she was told. She is thinking about how everything is connected, how the past and the present flow into each other, how the games of children today are echoes of the games of children 1,000 years ago. It is a comforting thought, a reminder that some things are constant, no matter how much the world changes. The afternoon passes quietly. The clouds begin to thin, and a pale sun breaks through, casting long, weak shadows across the snow. The temperature drops a little, but the wind is calm, and the air feels almost mild. The adults go about their work, repairing tools, tending to animals, preparing the evening meal. In the fort, the soldiers drill in the courtyard, their boots crunching on the packed snow. The centurion's voice rings out, sharp and clear, calling the cadence. It is a sound that has been heard on this frontier for decades, and it will be heard for decades more. As the afternoon wears on, Alia finishes her lessons for the day. She sends the children home with a simple assignment. They are to write a story about their own family, about where they came from, and how they ended up on the frontier. She knows that some of the children will struggle with this. Some of them do not know much about their own history. Their parents are too busy surviving to tell stories, or they are too tired, or they simply do not remember. But Alia hopes that the exercise will stir something, will encourage the families to talk, to share, to pass on the fragments of memory that they carry. She walks home through the quiet streets, the snow now soft and slushy underfoot. The sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and pale blue. It is beautiful, but it is a fleeting beauty, gone in moments. Alia stops for a moment to watch it, and she thinks about how much of life is like this, fleeting, temporary, precious. You have to stop and notice, or you will miss it. In the houses, the evening fires are lit once more. The stories begin again. Tonight, it is Livia who speaks, in the house of Marcus and Lucius. She tells a story from her own childhood, a story about a festival in her home village, a festival of lights and music and dancing. She describes the lanterns that hung from the trees, the smell of roasted meat, the sound of the flute and the drum. She describes the way the whole village came together, rich and poor, young and old, to celebrate the turning of the year. The children listen, their eyes bright, and they ask questions. Was there a parade? Were there horses? Did you dance? Livia laughs, and she says yes, yes, and yes. She danced until her feet ached, and she laughed until her stomach hurt, and for one night, the world was perfect. The story ends, and there is a moment of quiet. The fire pops. The wind stirs outside, a soft murmur against the walls. And then Marcus begins to sing, a low, rumbling song from his own childhood, a song about the sea and the stars and the long journey home. His voice is not beautiful, not in the way of a trained singer, but it is warm, and it is steady, and it fills the room with something that feels like safety. The night deepens, and the snow begins to fall again. It is a gentle snow, delicate and slow, like the last notes of a lullaby. The sentries on the wall pull their cloaks tighter, and they watch the snow fall, and they think about the warmth of the guardroom, but they do not complain. They are used to the cold. They have learned to accept it, just as they have learned to accept everything else the frontier gives them. In the house of Marcella, the old woman is dreaming. She is dreaming of the night long ago when her father told her about Rome. But in her dream, she is the one telling the story, and her father is the one listening. She tells him about the frontier, about the snow and the mud and the quiet, about the way the stars look different here, about the way the wind sounds like a voice. She tells him that she is glad she came, that she has no regrets, that the frontier has given her a life that is full, even if it is hard. And her father, in the dream, smiles and he says, "I told you, this is better." The snow continues to fall, covering the Vicus in a soft, white silence. And the frontier, for all its harshness, for all its solitude and struggle, is beautiful in its own way. It is the beauty of a life lived close to the earth, of a community bound together by necessity and choice, of a story that is still being written. It is a beauty that does not demand attention, that does not announce itself. It is just there in the quiet of the night, waiting to be noticed by those who have the patience to see. And you, listening from your own quiet place, perhaps far from any frontier, perhaps wrapped in your own blanket of comfort, can imagine that snow falling, can feel the cold air and the stillness. You can imagine the small glow of the hearth, the sound of breathing, the weight of history pressing gently on the present. You can imagine the children sleeping, their dreams filled with stories, and the adults resting, their bodies tired but their hearts full. You can imagine the old woman dreaming of her father, and the teacher writing by candlelight, and the soldiers watching the snow, and the families gathered around the fire. They are gone now, all of them. Their bodies have returned to the earth, their names forgotten, their houses crumbled. But something remains. The stories remain. The quiet moments, the small joys, the simple acts of endurance, they echo across the centuries, faint but persistent, like the memory of a song heard long ago. So the night continues, and the frontier sleeps, and the snow covers everything like a promise of renewal. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, and the snow will melt, and the mud will return, and the work will begin again. But tonight, there is only this: the dark, the cold, the quiet, and the fragile, enduring thread of human life. And with that, the story draws to a close. Not because it is over, because it is never over. The story of the frontier is the story of every place where people have lived on the edge, where they have carved a home out of a wilderness, where they have faced uncertainty, with courage and grace. It is the story of survival, yes, but it is also the story of love, of laughter, of the small, ordinary moments that make life worth living. So rest now, as they rested. Let the snow fall in your imagination. Let the fire warm your thoughts. Let the stories settle into your bones. And when you wake, carry a little bit of the frontier with you, a reminder that even in the hardest places, there is beauty. Even in the coldest nights, there is warmth. Even in the most uncertain times, there is hope. Sleep well. The frontier is at peace.